and there is a trial.
Well, Nick,
but it does,
I'll
just finish the question if I may, but it does suit you and Nigel Farage to change the subject nationally from the fact that Mr Farage took a vast donation of £5 million from someone living abroad, and he wishes to connect that with his security.
That single accusation changes the entire interview. Up until this point, the conversation is framed around security and public safety, but Nick Robinson suddenly shifts the focus onto something far more politically damaging. The question of whether a genuine tragedy is being used to draw attention away from an entirely different controversy. Before you decide whether that's fair, let's see how that argument unfolds from the beginning.
Clear who makes the decision.
Let me be clear what it is you're claiming happened. Do you accept that Nigel Farage was, as an MP, offered a security package, and a security package like the one given to the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, for example, that he had a secure car, that he had a protection officer? You accept that that was offered?
He initially was given a comprehensive plan, which I think was commensurate with the threat that he faced. I've been out and about with Nigel across the country, and I've seen the dangers that he faces every day. And then that was downgraded. I don't know why. Maybe that will be explained to Nigel when he meets the committee.
Notice where Nick starts. Instead of debating opinions, he first establishes the factual timeline. That forces the discussion onto what happened before anyone begins arguing about motives.
But that feels to me to have been very unwise, to say the least.
But the claim, just to be clear, the claim,
question
I just want to be sure about the claim.
Whether this would have happened to somebody with different political views.
I'll come to that, I promise. I'll give you the chance to make that point. I just want to be clear about the facts as you understand them. The claim being made, originally in the Eye newspaper, but the BBC stood this up, was that Nigel Farage was offered a bodyguard, a car, and a train driver last year and turned it down. I think you're saying, yes, he did turn it down, because he thought he needed more than that.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
And look at some of the instances that Nigel's faced over the years. I mean, the most obvious one that is now in the public domain is that a small boat migrant specifically came to the UK, a bloke with an AK-47 tattooed to him.
The conversation now begins to shift. The original question is about a rejected security package, but the answer moves toward explaining why the threat itself should have justified something greater.
Went on TikTok saying that he was coming to kill Nigel Farage. Eventually he was tracked down by the police and is now in prison for threatening to kill him. That is one instance that we know of that is in the public domain. There are others. This is, sadly, it gives me no pleasure to say this, sadly this is a man who is under great threat, and I just think the authorities are very blasé about that, as are parts of the media.
You're blurring,
aren't you? The other day, remember, Nick, parts of the media were happy to publish photographs which made it very difficult to know, very easy to know rather, where his daughter lived, his homes. I mean, come on.
Nigel Farage posed in front of his own homes for all the cameras repeatedly.
To have some basic level of protection.
Well, yes, but he did.
And I just don't think this would be happening to any other politician.
Sorry, you've said something very important. It's an allegation about the Times. It's not about the BBC. Mr Farage posed in front of his own home repeatedly, whereas the Times blurred the number.
This is the first time Nick interrupts to test a specific claim rather than letting it pass. Once an allegation becomes factual, he immediately asks whether the evidence actually supports it.
Which showed her property. We don't know whether that was how this individual or whoever is ultimately charged with this murder.
Why are you claiming the government are responsible for this? Because, as you know, there is an independent body called RAVEC, which looks not just at politician security, but as we know with the row with Prince Harry, looks at the protection of any prominent public figure. Now, are you saying it isn't independent? Because the Home Secretary is clear. It's nothing to do with her.
That's a choice. The Home Secretary is not powerless. Maybe she is. Maybe that's her view. Maybe she claims to be powerless. But look, the Home Secretary...
She takes independent advice from security experts. You're saying she shouldn't take that advice?
I think it's within her power to overrule it, if she wished to.
Well, I know
instances where prime ministers...
Here's where the interview becomes more interesting. The debate is no longer about whether Farage faced threats. It's about who should ultimately be held responsible for the decisions that followed.
If you have somebody in the level of danger that Nigel Farage is in, the Home Secretary of the day should provide them with security. And I tell you this, Nick, if I was Home Secretary, or if under Reform government I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and for any reason I was asked my opinion, I'd say, give my opponents the security that they deserve irrespective of their political views. And I say again,
But-
I do think that politics comes into this because it seems like the government,
Well, let's be
parts
clear
of the
what that
media
politics
are
is.
very, very blasé about the security of
I
reform.
want to be clear what your charge is. Sorry, I'm only interrupting you for clarity, actually, here, because you're saying there's something political here. Richard Tye said something pretty extraordinary the other day. It's as if someone in the establishment wants us dead. I mean, are we to take seriously the suggestion that Reform UK politicians believe, and let's give another quote, what Zia Youssef, your colleague, said.
This is a subtle but important shift. Nick moves away from discussing security itself and starts examining the language being used around it. Once claims become this serious, the obvious follow-up is whether they're supported by evidence.
The other day, none of the government, the Speaker, nor the police care at all about the security of Reform MPs. That is an extraordinary charge. Have you any evidence to back that up?
Well, look, Reform MPs are not asking for special treatment. What Reform MPs want is to be able to go home to their family at the end of the day in safety and to know that their homes and their loved ones are protected. There is a legitimate concern that the Reform MPs are more endangered than many others because we raise issues that many mainstream politicians shy away from. You know, if you talk about Islamist extremism, as I do, and Nigel Farage has done for many years.
Rather than addressing the evidence behind those earlier accusations, Jenrick reframes the discussion around the level of risk Reform MPs face. It's a different argument, and one that shifts the focus away from the original question.
You are likely to be in considerably more danger than those who don't.
Well, you can't say that, Mr. Jenrick. You've no evidence for that at all. There's a threat from the far right in this country. Ask Diane Abbott if she was in that seat. Ask the family of Joe Cox.
Many
there
MPs,
are people on all sides of politics
many
who become a
MPs,
target.
most MPs receive abuse. Many receive threats. I do think Reform MPs are more endangered than most. And go back to the example I just gave you. Nigel has called the small boats crisis a national security emergency for years. A small boat migrant is now in jail for threatening to kill him. So there is evidence to back this up. I do think it's wrong that parts of the media have
you've said that.
posting. I do think it was wrong.
Notice the distinction here. Nick is questioning a broad conclusion, while Jenrick responds with a specific example. Whether one case is enough to support the wider claim becomes the central point of disagreement.
That parts of the media claimed that Nigel was politicising the death of Anne Wood. It's an appalling claim when he was in fact mourning the death of a loved colleague. And he has been vindicated now because the police have admitted that the murderer may well have had a terrorist or political motivation. Okay. And Jonathan Hall, I'll just say, Nick, the government's independent reviewer of terrorist legislation, has chastised the police in strong terms, saying they broke the golden rule of investigations. They shouldn't have closed down the idea that this may have been a politically motivated.
So in the last few minutes,
Robert
Jenrick, are you going to let me ask a question? Go on. Just why not?
Go for it, Nick.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be an interview, would it, if you just gave a speech?
By this stage, both men are trying to define what the interview is actually about. Jenrick keeps returning to the security issue, while Nick is preparing to challenge the wider political narrative surrounding it.
Shall we? Thank you. In the last few minutes, you have attacked the media, you've attacked the police, you've attacked the government, you've attacked the Speaker, you've attacked the establishment, who apparently want someone dead in the Reform Party. What do you say to those who say, yes, this is a terrible tragedy, what happened to Anne Widdecombe? We don't actually know why she was murdered yet. We don't even know if she was murdered because of her connection with Reform UK. It could be an individual, personal view she took. Could be. None of this is clear until the police complete their investigation and there is a trial.
Well, Nick,
but it does. I'll just finish the question, if I may.
This is the moment the interview pivots. Instead of debating individual claims, Nick steps back and questions the overall narrative that's been built throughout the conversation. That sets up the most direct confrontation of the interview.
But it does suit you and Nigel Farage to change the subject nationally from the fact that Mr. Farage took a vast donation of £5 million from someone living abroad and he wishes to connect that with his security when in fact it has nothing to do with it at all. It's about a breach of parliamentary rules.
Nick, I didn't just attack the Speaker, for example. You just read off, I watched you, a pre-scripted final question to me, which you seem to have written before I had even said the piece I did over the course of the interview.
There is no such question on the paper. There is a quote from Zia Youssef, which I read out to you, Mr. Jenrick.
The point I'm making is that the government chose not to give Nigel the security that he needed. They now have, as a result of Anne Widdecombe's appalling murder, offered him a meeting. The Home Secretary could have offered that meeting a year ago, 2 years ago. She chose not to. That, I'm afraid, is playing politics with the safety of politicians, and I suspect that's because they don't like the views the Reform politicians take forward.
Robert Jenrick?
Because we are not mainstream politicians. We are politicians who are fighting the establishment every single day, and we're not backing down, Nick.
Rather than accepting Nick's premise, Jenrick rejects the framing altogether and returns to the argument he has made from the beginning. By this point, the interview has become less about security itself and more about which issue deserves the public's attention. So, what does this exchange actually tell us? What's interesting isn't that Nick Robinson and Robert Jenrick disagree. Political interviews are built on disagreement. What makes this conversation stand out is how often the debate shifts between two entirely different questions. Jenrick wants the discussion centered on security. His argument is that the threats against Nigel Farage are real, that public figures deserve protection, and that ministers should have acted sooner. Whether you agree or disagree, that's the case he consistently tries to make. Nick Robinson accepts that security is a legitimate issue, but he keeps bringing the conversation back to something else. His challenge is whether those security concerns are being presented alongside an unrelated political controversy involving Nigel Farage's donation in a way that changes the public conversation. That's why he repeatedly asks for evidence, separates individual allegations from broader conclusions, and pushes back whenever the discussion moves beyond what can actually be demonstrated. By the end of the interview, neither man has persuaded the other, but the pressure points become much clearer. One side argues that the establishment has failed to protect Reform politicians. The other argues that serious allegations require equally serious evidence and that separate political controversies shouldn't be merged without a clear connection. That's ultimately what makes this interview worth watching. It's not simply a clash of opinions. It's a reminder that the way an argument is framed can be just as important as the argument itself. The toughest moments often come when someone insists on narrowing the discussion back to one specific question, especially when the conversation keeps trying to move somewhere else. What do you make of that exchange? Did Nick Robinson keep the discussion focused on the key issue, or do you think Robert Jenrick had a valid point about how the debate was being framed? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoy calm, evidence-based political breakdowns like this one, don't forget subscribe.